Okay, good morning, and I apologize for the late start of the Marin Municipal Water District Operations Committee. I'm the vice chair, and we'll open the meeting on this Friday morning, June 19th, and I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Can you call roll, please?
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Quintero,
Aye. Okay. Thank you. Is there any public expression?
there
Sharice?
is no public expression.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the calendar. Do I have a motion to approve minutes of May 15th, or are there any corrections before we move for approval?
I'd move approval.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Quintero,
Aye, thank you very much. So item 2 is the renewal of the annual insurance policies for fiscal year 2021. So we'll go to the presenter there. Good morning, Chuck.
Good morning. Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, this is insurance renewal for the next fiscal year. The way that we're doing this is we're presenting this today to the operations committee for some discussion, and then it will come back on Thursday, June 25th, next Thursday, at the finance committee for adoption if the board is amenable. So I'm joined today by Seth Cole. He's Senior Vice President at Alliant, and Mac McManus is Vice President at Alliant. And they've done a lot of the work on getting these quotes together for us. And then I've got Mick Young on the line too. So hopefully between us, we can field any questions that you have on this. So the first portion of insurance that's covered is liability insurance. So things like auto liability, personal injury, employment practices. And one of the things you can note there first in that bottom right column or bottom right box there is that there's a $55,000 increase in insurance next year, about 17% over this year. And there's also an increase in the self-insured retention. So if you kind of look down at the rows there, you have our primary liability, which is that first layer of coverage up to $5 million. And then on top of that, we've got the two excess layers for $10 million a piece that bring us up to a total coverage for liability of $25 million. As I said, one thing to kind of note here is that that self-insured retention, so that's the amount that we're on the hook for an incident before the insurance kicks in, that's gone up substantially from $250,000 to $500,000. My understanding in talking with Alliant is that's kind of the industry standards. If you look at the second attachment or the first attachment that you have in your package, you can see what the different quotes were. And what we've kind of done here is select this based on premium management. So we've selected what we think will give us adequate insurance for the best premium. So the step up in the SIR is significant, but we don't think that's going to be a big problem. We kind of looking back at our claim experience, going back to 2004, we've only had 4 claims that have exceeded that SIR of $250,000. And I think the highest was a little bit over $500,000. So with liability insurance, we're recommending this mix that will take us to $391,000, up $55,000 from $336,000 from last year. The next insurance that we'll look at, the big one, is property insurance. So again, you can see here that our property insurance is going up by $41,000. And also the deductible here is going up markedly. So we had a $25,000 deductible before, and to keep that would be substantially higher for the premium. This insurance recommendation steps the deductible up from $25,000 to $1 million, and that's the recommendation. A couple of the drivers you probably noted in the staff report. We did a new appraised value on our major treatment plants at San Geronimo and Bon Tempe. And that went from $75 million up to $275 million. So that's a big driver there. We've also seen a lot of natural catastrophes nationwide in the past 3 years. So that's also driving costs. You can think about the California statewide wildfire experience that we've had. But again, as we kind of balance this with the deductibles versus premiums, we look back at our experience, and we've had no property claims exceeding the deductible since 2011. So we think that's a pretty good mix there. The next one that we'll talk about is workers' comp insurance, and workers' comp insurance is one of the areas where we've actually seen a decrease. The self-insured retention will stay the same at $750,000, and we drop from $114,000 this year to $98,000 next year. And basically, the drivers there that's bringing this down is we've had good workers' comp experience. So we did loss runs to look at how we've done over the past several years, and that SIR of $750,000 has not been exceeded since 2012. And then on this slide, we kind of mixed together the smaller portions of the insurance package that's recommended. So we have auto. That's just for auto physical damage, not personal injury. So that's going up a little bit. Up by $1,000, about 5% increase. Aviation, that's just coverage for the drones that we have. That's a negligible increase of $22. We also have cyber liability insurance. So for things like ransomware attacks and those kind of events or outages, we have coverage. And again, that went up by about 10-15%. And then pollution liability, we had some discussion about that and decided to keep it in place. So that protects us if we have any kind of spillages that would damage fish species or anything like that. We'd be covered for the penalties that we would get. You can see that looks there like it went up by $3,000 or 20%. I think, Seth, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the comparison there is we're comparing a full 12 years for next year's insurance to 11 years of insurance in the past year. So that's part of the differential in the cost there. And then finally, we have crime coverage that is up by $160. Again, pretty marginal increase there. So the overall look that you can see in the past couple of slides, our premiums are going to increase. They're going from $665,000 up to $741,000, assuming that the board goes with the recommendations we put forward here, an increase of about 13%. And again, a lot of that's driven by what's going on nationwide, statewide, is just driving a lot of those costs higher in the insurance world. You notice that the self-insured retention and the deductibles in cases of liability and property insurance are markedly higher. We also, in your package at the bottom of attachment 1, you can see that we had some non-binding quotes that we looked at for dams and for earthquake coverage. Those both, I think, were prohibitively expensive. And I think if we probably had losses that would affect our dams, or we had a loss from an earthquake, we would probably expect some help from FEMA on that. So that's the presentation. If you have questions, we're glad to field them. And again, Seth and Matt are on the call, who are really experts in the insurance area. So between us, hopefully we can answer your questions.
I have a question. The SIR and deductibles are essentially the same. Am I right about that? And they're deductibles.
Yeah, it's a little bit different terminology, and there are some nuances, but essentially they are very similar. Essentially, that's the portion of the claim that the district would be responsible for.
Okay. What's difficult to understand, I mean, traditionally, you think, well, we're going to raise the deductible in order to reduce the premium. To have them both going up at the same time is, I've got to say, difficult to understand.
Yeah, and talking specifically to the property, First, what the real cost driver there is the increase in insured values. The district's insured values almost doubled. It went up 200 million, and that's really the cost driver. So increasing that deductible was a means to try to keep the premium increase in check. Essentially, the rating basis for the property policy is the insured values that you have, and so that's the big driver. That's really the reason on the property side. There are some market conditions going on right now that Chuck had touched on. We'd had numerous years of underwriting losses in the property insurance market due to natural catastrophes. More specific in California, it's been the wildfire experience. And that's really also driving some of the increase. But that 200 million increase in values is the biggest cost driver on the property. On the liability side, there have been historically for a water district of your size, there have only been 2 insurance markets that would offer a $250,000 deductible or self-insured retention. Given the litigious environment in California and the notion of what is being called social inflation, where you have these runaway jury verdicts and larger settlements, the insurance industry is no longer offering that $250,000 self-insured retention. That's been increased. One of the markets actually increased to $1 million, and then one increased to $500,000. Thus, the increase to $500,000 on the liability program. And the increase is in premium is driven by the market conditions. We've just seen a drastic shift in the insurance market, and most notably recently COVID-19. We don't think a lot about, how COVID-19 might be impacting the insurance market, but they're expecting that the losses, all combined, insured losses from COVID-19 will exceed $100 billion and will be the largest single loss in insurance history. And that's going to have the insurance market upside down for a couple of years. We're in for another tough year next year, depending on how insured losses shake out from not only COVID-19, but all the civil unrest and protests and things of that nature that's a big hit to the insurance industry as well.
Okay, and how do you measure, obviously in the nutshell version, when you look at the data and you make a nationwide analysis, obviously wildfires very impactful in that analysis, versus our situation where I think I just heard that in the last, I think it was 4 years, we have virtually no claims that the insurance company had to get involved in.
It's 8 years.
Yeah, so, yes. Yeah, so great question. And so our clients that have had claims on the property side are seeing anywhere from a 35% to over 100% increase, and they're losing coverage. And so what we call the good guys, if you will, the good accounts on average are seeing low 20% increases in premium, all things being equal. Those with loss problems and loss history are having significantly bigger increases, as well as some of those that have had wildfire claims are actually losing coverage for wildfire.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay.
Do we have wildfire coverage?
You do, yes.
So it would be liability for wildfire? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you have both. You actually, on the property side, heaven forbid that one of the district's assets is damaged in a wildfire, you do have coverage for that damage to that asset. Flip side, if somehow the district were to contribute to a wildfire, causing a wildfire, then the liability insurance would kick in.
And then on the pollution insurance, does that cover penalties that are imposed by the state, or what coverage does that actually provide?
Yeah, so pollution insurance policies do cover fines, not criminal, but civil fines and penalties.
Okay.
I have a question, Seth. With an increasing cost of insurance, what, besides the obvious, what's the value of changing the value of the properties from 100 million to 200 million? Why do it now?
Because the insurance market is mandating that properties be properly valued when they're being insured. What the insurance industry has experienced the last couple of years, and what's driven some of these big losses in the industry, is that property has been undervalued. So you might be paying premium on a treatment plant. Let's say it's valued at $25 million. If you have a full loss and that's a $100 million claim, the insurance carriers have to pay that $100 million claim, but they only collected premium on $25 million in assets.
Sure, but
And the insurance companies no longer will do that.
when you look at a house burns down, it's a total loss of the structure. But the chance of us having all the plants go down at the same time is pretty low. Possible,
Yeah,
but pretty low.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar. We insure the town of Paradise and Paradise Irrigation District.
That's a winner, huh?
Once we saw what happened there, I never say never anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still, the practical side is if you have a single facility and it burns down, that's one thing. But when you have multiple facilities, the chance of them all going seems to be pretty low.
You're absolutely correct. It's remote, but again, insurance companies won't offer you property insurance if you're not insuring your property to value.
Okay.
Each and every location.
Yeah,
And it's just
for
a
every
happenstance
location.
that it moved up from 100 to 200 evenly, not to 192.
Those are actually very round numbers. It actually increased 198 million in change. So
I
Chuck
see.
just used
Okay.
some round numbers in there.
So that's what's actually insured is 198.
For the treatment plants.
Yes.
So it
guys have-
went up
it-
198.
Increase
Yeah,
that.
went up 198. In total, you have over $400 million in assets.
Gotcha.
And Seth, just to clarify for the board, I think the option that we
Yeah.
chose for the property insurance has a step up in the total insured value for 2 years.
Yeah, so one of the things we were able to negotiate without taking the full brunt of that increase in values is that we're stair-stepping it in. So in year one, and I'll use round numbers, in year one, the underwriters are charging a premium based on 100 million in increased values, and then in year two they'll factor in that second 100 million, so that you didn't have to take that full brunt, or the premium would be much larger this year.
Seth, are our green assets insured? In other words, if we had a wildfire, it would cost millions of dollars to replant and, try to resuscitate the watershed. So are those assets insured?
No, so standing timber generally is not insurable. Unless it's a crop, then you can get specific crop insurance for it. But outside of that, standing timber is not insurable. Now, landscaping, so if you had some landscaping at the district office, that's one thing. Landscaping is covered, but not standing timber.
Oh,
So our open space effectively is not insured.
Correct. For damage to, correct.
Yeah.
Larry, that's a really good question, because the crop that we do have is water. And a fire on the watershed could have a significant negative effect on the quantity and the quality of water. You get some.
Well, maybe on the quality, you get more, Armando. You'll get more water when no trees are there, but the
Say that
quality
again?
will be worse.
What's that, Larry?
I said you'll get more water if the trees are gone.
Yeah,
It'll
but
increase the quantity of runoff, but the quality will be worse. That's true.
Much worse, and that's going to have a ripple effect in the in the treatment of the water and the system. It's actually it can actually really overload the water treatment plants, because as you know, Larry, I mean, that a really hot fire just releases all kinds of minerals and chemicals, and really negatively affect the water.
Sure. Remember, we have the reservoirs, though.
How do you mean?
It will slow down the water coming to the treatment plant, has to pass through the reservoir.
Well, in the Sierra Nevada, where there's been fires, there's been really significant costs that the water districts have incurred in terms of having to treat that water that comes through a major fire zone.
Yeah, as part of the wildfire task force work, we did identify this as an issue, and we do have some follow-on work that we're going to do. We're going to be jar testing and trying to understand and develop some treatment strategies were that to happen. And of course, have a mitigation plan to get swales and that sort of stuff out there before the wet season, of course, depending on the fire. But you're right, that is a vulnerability that we do have.
I would imagine, Ben, you could even treat in the reservoir if you had to.
Yeah, potentially.
Conceivably, at least.
Larry, what I've heard, but more to come on this, is you may have a kind of package rough course filter that you would drop in on your treatment train to take out the stuff before it hits your sand filters. But more to come as we look into this further.
And then maybe, if there's damage to the filters, I don't know, and maybe our insurance consultant can address it, would that be covered by the property coverage?
Yeah, if the filters themselves are damaged and the proximate cause is fire, which is a covered peril under your property policy, then I think we have a really good argument for coverage to replace or repair the filters.
So,
but if we get ash and mud flows that impact the quality, that's probably not covered. Is that correct? The additional cost and expense to deal with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area. A lot of that's being debated right now up in Paradise. They're still working through, that happened a couple of years ago now almost. And they're still sorting through what is covered, what isn't covered, how much assistance and where FEMA's coming into play. So a lot of different moving parts there, but I don't think that has been fully resolved yet.
Yeah, I mean, the fires in Santa Rosa, wasn't there, there was a tremendous cost in putting in bales of straw to catch material before it went into reservoirs and such, Ben, is that?
Yeah, mostly protecting creeks. But yeah, there was a tremendous cost. A lot of that work was done by FEMA and Army Corps and that kind of stuff. So we got support there.
One of the things about this, though, is this, as you said, there's a lot of change and there's a lot of learning and morphing going on. And Chuck, I'll send you some legislation that was passed a few years ago that recognizes green infrastructure, which is watersheds, as being equated to gray infrastructure. So you can actually increase fees, water fees and such, based on the value, what it takes to take care of that watershed. And so it raises the watershed as infrastructure sort of in the same, it's a slightly different category, but in a broad sense, the same category as your pipes and pumps and equipment. But I'll send that to you, Chuck, so you can take a look at it and see. Because I think, again, this stuff is morphing. And so if there's clarity that needs to be added by the legislature or something, that's something that this could bring up.
Yeah.
So that's a good question, Larry. Thanks.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions?
I just had one other question, more for Chuck than for the insurance folks. Which do we maintain a reserve on workers' comp claims, $750,000?
We maintain reserves that we book, but they're based on the claims that we have outstanding. So we don't have $750,000 in reserve.
Would it be worth moving or redesignating any of the money we do have in reserve, or is it too much of a moving target to matter?
We could look at it. One of the things we could do is do an actuarial and see if we're reserving enough. But just like we kind of mentioned on the slide for workers' comp, we really haven't had a lot of major incidents that have exceeded our SIR. So increasing that reserve, I'm not sure. I'm not sure we need to do that. We could absolutely, but.
And then just as, go ahead. I was just going to ask, as a practical matter, if we get a workers' comp claim, don't we tender it to the company, or do we have like an independent adjusting agency that we use? I mean, somebody's got to handle managing the claim, right?
Yeah.
Who does that?
Well, we do have a company that works with us managing the claims.
Administrator.
Yeah, Okay,
Yep.
and then we'll just paying them out of operating funds.
Correct.
That's correct. I just wanted to note, because reserves came up, we are in the next week or so kicking off our 10-year financial plan, and there will be an element of that we take a look, because reserves comes up periodically, take a look broadly at the different reserve categories that we have and have a discussion with the board in terms of our policies and approaches going forward for reserves generally.
Okay, that sounds
Yeah,
good.
and that's one of the reasons that we, target that 6 month of operating reserves is for, some sort of an event that will require a large cash outflow.
Yeah. I don't think I have any more questions. So.
Are there any public comments on this? Therese?
There is no public comment.
Okay, so do we want to take a vote on forwarding this to the full board?
Sure, I'll move we forward it to the board.
Second.
Okay, you do a roll call, please.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Quintero.
Aye, thank you so much. Larry Russell, do you want to take over the meeting or?
What was that?
So I
do
just
you want-
wanted to very briefly, if I could, just note that for timing, end of fiscal year, we're going to be bringing this back to finance for adoption, not the next board meeting, just so you're
That'll be
informed
next
on it.
week. And that'll be next week, Ben.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Sorry about that, I forgot that. We're going to go on to item 3. Larry Russell, do you want to run the meeting or should I continue?
You go ahead, Armando.
Okay, we're going to now move to item 3, which is an information item, and it's about the public safety power shutdown readiness update. Good morning, Paul Sellier.
Good morning. Yes, the public safety power shutdown program is PG&E's attempt to sort of reduce their power lines as an ignition source for wildfires. And of course, last year in 2019, we all experienced this sort of unprecedented countywide outage of power that affected all of our facilities. And so, just in short, I'm pleased to report that thanks to the dedicated effort of our staff, we've made improvements to our system that will enhance our ability to respond in the face of this similar widespread power outage. And just pausing for a moment to think that, we returned the generators from last season only in the middle of December last year. And it was February when Mike Bond gave the committee, an update on how we responded during that event. And so here we are, June, and we're back to PSPS again, having, of course, experienced the last 3 months of COVID-19 thrown in. So a busy year. But some of the highlights and actions that we've taken over those few months, of course, first and foremost, adapting to the driest February that we've experienced. Staff ensured that the generators that we need for emergency power were on site and delivered by May 15th, ahead of our original July 1st target date that we sort of normally selected. Details of some of the actions, I'm just going to briefly touch on these and jump in with any questions. But remote control of pump stations is a key feature of our ability to respond so that we don't have to send staff out to every pump station. We can actually actuate the generators from our central office. And while we had made some of these arrangements in 2019, we've sort of formalized and standardized them in 2020 so that the connection of generators and the control of these generators is routine. We've added solar power at key sites, 5 additional sites, all of this done with in-house staff. We've tried to increase battery life. We had 3 days worth of batteries at many of our facilities where solar was not an option. and we're increasing those to try to double that length to 6 days. We've added additional transfer switches to different facilities, notably the corporation yard and the water quality lab, as well as a couple other pump stations. We've got a solid logistics plan covering fueling, contracts, delivery, and monitoring of fuel levels. We've got transport and routing of the generators that aren't stationed at pump stations. There are some generators that will power multiple pump stations, and each one has a sort of a route similar to, I guess, a bus, right? And then a staff crew that's assigned to make sure that that happens and in what order that happens. And of course, there's repair and maintenance planning and monitoring that needs to be taken into account if this is an extended power outage. And finally, of course, we're getting the word out to our customers. The July newsletter, I think, is in the works, and we're refreshing our website materials to help our customers understand what it is they can do to prepare for a PSPS event. And of course, we're not alone in this. PG&E have been taking actions of their own, some of which should help in reducing the length of power outages, notably the time to restore power. PG&E is estimating that that's down to 12 hours of daylight now, where in the past that could have been up to 48 hours. And the staff report details some of those actions. So again, in summary, overall, our ability to respond is better this year than it was last year. And I'll just stop there and take any questions.
Paul, I just wanted to share to the board that, in fact, there was an article, I believe, in today's IJ. I just saw the headline, and that Marin, like, of course, the district is facing kind of a triple threat, right? So COVID, wildfire, PSPS. And we have thought about what does our response mean in context of COVID, and we're confident that we'll be able to respond and that won't be a significant impediment for us.
Yes.
So do we have I think it looks great. The solar, the battery backup, all that looks much more resilient than we were last year. So kudos on that. And then I was just wondering if we have some kind of financial breakdown of the costs of doing all this good work.
I think we have some estimates in general for our PSPS efforts from last year, and adding on to that, I think we may have spent maybe another $100,000 putting in the solar, purchasing batteries,
That's not
transfer switches, these kinds of, yeah. So fairly significant. I mean, it's not a huge, capital investment, but it's really hours of work by staff, hundreds of hours of work.
Yeah, I think.
And it does.
Networking. I just was going to say that networking it through SCADA is pretty cool.
Yeah.
In talking with Paul and his folks, much of the work we're doing is kind of good work generally in terms of emergency response as we think about earthquakes and others. So even though it's the PSPS that is pushing us and prioritizing the work, this is really positioning the district to be stronger for almost any emergency response situation.
Yeah.
I do think that we've talked about this before, that it would be interesting to have a budget category that just captures those climate change related increase in costs that we have, because really that fundamentally is what this goes to, and ends up being a part of the story that we can tell the public when we are looking at things like rates, and just what the district is doing. It's sort of that combination. But I do think it's interesting and really positive that all the things that we're going through are in essence strengthening us strengthening the position of the district for business continuity with all these various, who knows what else is coming.
Yeah.
So this is just all smart
Yeah.
and good work, Paul and company.
Very good work.
Yeah, it's good.
Are there comments?
There's no public comments.
Okay, thank you, Cherise. All right, that was an information item. So we're going to now move to item 4, which is the annual 2020 Division of Safety of Dams inspection, which is a new program for water agencies and owners of dams. Good morning, Lucy. This is also an information item. Good morning, Lucy.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you.
Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So good morning, Lucy Croy, Senior Engineer in Planning. I'm going to give an update on our annual 2020 Division of Safety of Dams inspections. This inspection usually happens each spring, and the most recent one occurred in mid-April. And they determined that all of our dams continue to remain in good condition and operate safely. I'm going to give a brief overview of what our dam safety program is, and then also what those inspections with DSOD entail.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the year, we monitor frequently many conditions at the dams. We have visual inspections at the dams that occur by a number of personnel. So engineering staff, rangers, water quality personnel go out and do visual inspections of the dam and notice anything that may look unusual. Monthly, we have piezometer data that tracks water seepage and water pressure in the dams tracked and collected. And then annually, we also collect dam movement. So any kind of minor alignment or settlement in the dams is surveyed annually, and all of that information is collected into an instrumentation report that is submitted to DSOD. There's ongoing maintenance activities that our watershed crews take on, and minor capital improvements just to maintain the integrity of our dams. And then these annual inspections occur each year and have occurred for many years with DSOD, and that's what I'm going to go over is our most recent one. So prior to DSOD coming out, they usually review those instrumentation reports and look at the data that we've submitted each year to make sure that the dam is performing, all 7 dams are performing as intended. Looking at the water pressure that's in the dams and moving through the dams as expected. And then when we go out into the field, we have a few crew from the district. We have usually engineering staff, we have facilities, and we also have watershed staff all meet out with an inspector from DSOD, and we will typically go to all 7 dams over a span of 2 to 3 days and look at the spillways. They're each examined for vegetation and cracks and any kind of unusual growth or anything that looks different than in years past. The upstream and downstream faces of the dams are also inspected, especially in the dam groins, just to make sure that we are kind of keeping good conditions out there so that those visual inspections are effective. All of the critical outlet valves are operated and exercised by our staff throughout the year, but there's also periodic exercising that occurs in the presence of DSOD. And then DSOD will also inspect the emergency access to the dams so that we have good access in any kind of weather condition. If there was an emergency, we would be able to get to our dams and make sure that the roads are well rocked. So this is a picture from 2 years ago when we inspected Kent Dam. There was no water going down the spillway, so we were actually able to get into the dam, into the spillway, and look around at the concrete, make sure that the joints, the slab joints looked good, that there wasn't any falling or cracks that were unusual, which is very typical for those kind of inspections, and everything looked good. We also will look at if there's logs or any kind of debris, and so what occurred very short after this picture was taken was that log was removed from the spillway, just so that, you know, once water does start spilling down, it wouldn't carry through and damage the walls of the spillway. This is a picture from this year. This is Suluhuli spillway looking down at the flip bucket. We also will inspect vegetation growth around the spillways, so making sure that no vegetation is going to undermine the concrete that is on the spillway, the slabs, making sure that, you know, there's no structural integrity issues that could occur because we maintain the vegetation. It's removed, and over time that could degrade. As with Oroville, there was issues where there was voids underneath the spillway because we need to make sure that we remove the vegetation and keep things very clean out there. So this is regular maintenance for our crews, and I think down at the bottom you'll see that there's kind of some wet growth, and that's also coming from the weep holes on the side of the dam. So shortly thereafter, our watershed crews also removed that. This is at the base of Lagunitas Dam. This is also from this year. This is looking at up the downstream face of the dam, and we'll also look at growth on the faces of the dam to make sure that, you know, I talked about the visual inspections that the rangers do, that our engineering staff do, and we need to make sure that any of these patches of dense growth are removed, because that allows those visual inspections to be much more effective. If there's any slumping in the dams, we can see it much more easily if those patches are removed. And this is very typical for us to remove it throughout the year. We just hadn't gotten to it by the time the inspection was done this year. This is at Bontempi Dam. This is on the face of the dam looking down the side. That's just some minor debris that had accumulated over the winter, and DSOD recommended that we remove the accumulated woody debris. The road is also well rocked. We have good access, and you also see that the riprap looks good. That was a project that our crews did about 2 years ago after DSOD recommended. So just good maintenance out of the dams is what happens usually after some of these inspections, and just how we take care of our dams. And then this is Francisco Lopez, one of our utility system specialists, and he is exercising the valve at Nicasio. It's a scour valve down at the base. This work typically happens every 6 months, but then periodically it occurs also in the presence of DSOD. So he is opening the valve fully and ensuring that it works properly, making sure that in the event of an emergency, we would be able to lower the level of the reservoir very quickly and get water down, so that, you know, just to keep safety downstream of the dam. Let's see. So in summary, DSOD determined that all 7 dams are safe for continued use and operation as in years past. The major recommendations that came out of this year's inspection were primarily vegetation management on both the upstream and downstream faces of the dams, and then also behind some of the weirs where we measure, we do monthly monitoring. All of the DSOD inspection reports will be posted on our website, and I think that is it. See, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. On the more frequent inspections we do that are done by engineers and rangers and different categories of people, give me a little bit more on what kind of detail goes into that. Are those on a regularly scheduled basis? Do they use, for example, a checklist that they go through, or is it just sort of a drive-by?
So monthly, they will go out and they will, our engineering staff goes out and collects pedometer readings monthly. It's over about 2 or 3 days. And then we'll also collect weir data, so how much seepage is coming through the dams, which is all expected, it's all regular monitoring. And they will look at the face of the dam and look for any changes. We typically have the same staff go out to notice any changes. They have a standardized worksheet that they use when they do that work.
Hey, Lucy?
Sounds like Lucy needs a glass of water.
Lucy, there's something wrong with your audio, so we're just going to mute and unmute you. If you could try that again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
did everybody understand, Lucy? I did. I mean, I did. It was funny, Lucy. It was like you're reporting from inside a reservoir, like inside the reservoir.
It's
I
still
think you're going to
there.
have to sign back in. I don't think muting and unmuting is going to do it.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, sign back in, Lucy. Yep.
There she
That was funny.
goes. That was odd.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
That's
one of
what
those
the problem-
moments.
Well, that's
Great.
a bandwidth problem. That's what happens to Zoom. When you run out of bandwidth, then you lose the voice first, and away it goes. Then you get zapped.
Yeah. You know, would there be a way to, from a legal compliance standpoint, to have a chat function for staff or something so that you can manage that in the background during these conversations?
Yes, that's better.
That's better.
Yeah, you're back.
You got out of the aquarium.
Water.
Yeah.
It's always something.
I have some questions. Are there any other questions from?
I didn't actually hear an answer to that one today.
You did or you didn't?
Yeah, if you
Shut up, Jack. I got it.
give me a summary, please. Yeah.
So monthly we go out, we collect the piezometer data, so how much water seepage and pressure is moving through the dams. We have the same staff go out. Typically, they use worksheets that look at the typical conditions. They'll look for what the vegetation looks like out there, and they do have a small checklist that they look at. Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I have a question, Lucy. Why do they care about woody debris against the riprap like that?
It leads to rodent infestations.
I see. Helps them.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You know, I know that in a lot of dams in California, they've asked for cores of things like the thickness of the concrete on spillways and things. Have we had to do that in the past, or has that been discussed?
Yeah, we already did that.
We'll likely be doing it in the next year or two. It's part of our phase 2 of the spillway inspections, spillway assessments.
Didn't we spend $800,000 doing that?
No.
There was a study.
We did a first phase condition assessment that was more looking at the design and a first non-destructive evaluation.
Okay.
Didn't Flood Zone 9 do some core samples at Phoenix a couple of years ago?
I believe you are correct. Yes.
So we do have that data.
Yes, and that's from the dam itself.
The dam itself. Yeah, not the spillway, I guess.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, we knocked that dam down, Larry.
Oh, I remember.
Not all the way, but we took off the top.
Yeah, no, I remember when it was taken out of service.
Yeah.
I had one other question, which is just a hypothetical, but if the release valves look like they're all manual, whether it's worth trying to make those into some kind of SCADA controlled type of system.
It's a good question. Those valves typically would, you'd open them and it would take two days to lower the level 50% is how they're designed. So
yeah,
it depends on the conditions. It depends on what the event is you're designing for.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably not worth it.
You know, one thing that really prompted this program by DSOD was the failure of the spillway of Orville. And, one of the things that really stood out is that there were sections of that spillway in Orville, that giant spillway, where the concrete was only 6 inches thick.
Right.
which is insane. I mean, most of the concrete up there is 2 to 3 feet thick, if not more now with the repair.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was things like that that prompted this check.
For the tallest dam in the United States, or the tallest earthen dam, isn't it, in the United States?
Yeah, but it was 1950s work. So it's probably
And
still
through-
wasn't good for the 50s. I don't know. Larry Russell would be the one to comment on that.
Well, it's probably the first thing they build, which is interesting. So they're least likely to run out of money because you want to get the spillway in before you start impounding the water. But, it's hard to know what the right thickness is and something like that. I don't think it was the 6 inches that was the problem. I think it was the seams, that the water caught the seams and lifted the slab off. And, what they spend, $6 billion or something on that, several billion at least, replacing the spillway. So it probably won't lift again.
Right. They literally worked down to the bedrock and then had crews with shop vacs, vacuuming all the small grit and dirt out of there before they poured the new concrete. Just an amazing job. Anyway, are there any other questions for Lucy? Are there any public comments?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Lucy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody you worked with her on that. Okay. Move on to the next item, and I'm flipping down to it, so give me a second. This is a really thorough report, Lucy. Yeah. Okay. Item 5 is the easement agreement with the town of Tiburon, and it's Stan Graham.
That'll actually be me, Armando. I'll be taking the next 2 items.
All right.
So the district has an 8-inch welded steel pipe that runs down Mar West Road in Tiburon and also runs behind the Tiburon Library and the Tiburon Town Hall. And we recently discovered that the easement for that water line was not properly recorded. So the district and the town have been working together on an easement agreement for a 25-foot wide easement that comprises about 13,700 feet. The Town Council of Tiburon approved the easement on Wednesday, and today we're asking the Operations Committee to review and refer this item to the board with a recommendation to authorize the general manager to execute the easement agreement with the town of Tiburon.
Thanks. Are there any questions on this?
What do you mean it wasn't recorded properly? How does that happen?
Well, that's a good question, Jack. It was installed back in 1987 as part of a pipeline extension agreement, and who knows why it was never recorded, but I'm glad we discovered it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move.
I gave you guys credit for getting it done without them charging us, because I would have expected to see a charge for that easement that we really need,
Yeah.
But you did a good job to convince them, because they're pretty tough, Tiburon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so refer this to the board meeting for approval.
Yeah, I'll move.
Second.
Second.
Sharice, is there any public comments
There is no.
before we do the vote?
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Director
Thanks,
Bregman,
Jerry.
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Quintero.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 6, which is again Mike Bond, and it's consent to the assignment of the lease 39 from T-Mobile West.
So we've had a lease agreement with T-Mobile West since about 96 to lease about 300 square feet of our Monte Mar Vista tank site in Sausalito at 40 Crescenta Lane. The T-Mobile is in the process of selling a large portion of their communications portfolio to Vertical Bridge. Vertical Bridge is the largest private owner of communications infrastructure in the United States. Per our agreement with T-Mobile, the district's consent is required in order for them to assign this lease to Vertical Bridge. So district staff have reviewed the assignment request and have determined that Vertical Bridge is capable of performing the terms of lease 59. So we're recommending that the committee review and refer this item to the board with a recommendation to authorize the general manager to execute the consent to assignment agreement for lease 59.
Is there any
Thank you.
questions?
Yeah,
I have a comment, Mike. You know, it's interesting that, or perhaps we should give some thought to putting in a clause in the leases that say if you change the ownership, it opens the lease up to renegotiation. Just something to think about for the future. It doesn't affect this one, obviously, but
I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't. I mean, you know, I don't know. And the other question I had was how much time is remaining on the lease?
yeah, that's a good
So
question.
we did update the lease back in 2014. We renegotiated the lease, and the lease term is subject to annual CPI adjustments. So we feel pretty good about this one. A minimum of 3%. It's in effect every November. When the lease, so the current term is for 5 years. It expires in 2024, at which time we can review the lease for any adjustments. So that is already built in, but as far as reviewing it upon assignment, that's definitely something we can look at.
And
then
do we have other leases with this, guys? Vertical Bridge?
we will.
I think Larry's right. Yes, this is the first.
An assignment isn't necessarily a release of liability. I presume that we're releasing T-Mobile from the liability under the lease.
Do you want to answer that, Jared?
Yes, so they'll be assuming all the liabilities whenever they assume the lease. That's how it will work.
With a release of T-Mobile.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so on the effective date, Vertical Bridge or their subsidiary VVT1 that will be assigning the lease to will be assuming all liabilities and responsibility going forward.
Okay.
And is the assignment clause that it shall not be unreasonably withheld? Is that the kind of language in there?
Yeah, so within the assignment clause, it says that it's subject to the board's approval, you know, based on financial review. I think there are 5 different things that the board can look at and consider, and it essentially says that it shall not be unreasonably withheld.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
So any other questions or referral to the board?
Oh, I'll move that we refer it to the board.
Second.
Okay.
could you
there
send
no-
around, Jared, when you get a chance?
What was that, Larry? You cut out.
Could you send a copy of the lease around to the board, please?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And Sharice, do we have public comment before the roll call?
We do not have public comment.
Thank you.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Quintero.
Aye. Okay, there are no further items. I think this concludes the Operations Committee meeting for this month.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, take care.